The Untold Files.
There is a question nobody in the Italian Mafia ever wanted to answer. Not in 1955. Not ever. The question is this: what happens when you send your hardest soldiers, men who have killed for the Genovese family since Prohibition, into a neighborhood that does not belong to you, to take something from a man who has never lost anything he did not choose to give away? What happens when those soldiers walk into Harlem? What happens when Harlem answers? The man who sent them was Mike Coppola. They called him Trigger Mike, a caporagime of the most powerful mafia crew in America, the 116th Street Crew, 60 made men, 150 associates, numbers rackets generating more money per year than some Fortune 500 companies. A man so violent that he probably murdered his own wife to keep her from testifying. A man so feared that even the bosses above him looked the other way. And in the spring of 1955, Trigger Mike decided he wanted more. He wanted Harlem. All of it. Not just East Harlem. Not just the Italian blocks above 110th Street. He wanted the black numbers banks, the policy slips, the runners, the collectors. The entire river of cash that flowed through every barbershop and candy store and church basement from 116th to 155th. He wanted what belonged to one man. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, the man the streets called Bumpy. And within 72 hours, Trigger Mike Coppola would learn something that Dutch Schultz learned 20 years earlier. That Lucky Luciano understood that even the federal government at Alcatraz could not teach Bumpy Johnson. You do not take Harlem. Harlem takes you. If you are still watching this right now, you are about to hear one of the most dangerous untold stories from the golden age of American organized crime. So before we go any deeper, do me a favor, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because the stories we tell here are the ones they never wanted you to know. And if you think you know Bumpy Johnson, if you think the TV show told you everything, stay right here, because this story has never been told like this before. To understand what happened in 72 hours, you first need to understand the geography, because in 1955, Harlem is not one neighborhood, it is two. And the line between them is drawn in blood. East Harlem, from roughly 96th Street to 125th Street, east of Lexington Avenue, is Italian. It is one of the largest Italian-American enclaves in the country. The restaurants serve ossobuco. The social clubs have no signs on their doors. The men standing outside them speak Neapolitan dialect and do not answer questions. This is where Ciro Terranova once ruled as the Artichoke King. This is where Trigger Mike Coppola inherited command. This is where Fat Tony Salerno will one day hold court at the Palma Boys Social Club on East 115th Street, chewing cigars and skimming millions. The 116th Street Crew is not just a faction of the Genovese family. It is arguably the single most powerful crew in the entire American Mafia. Joseph Falacchi, the first made man to ever testify before Congress, called it the biggest crew in the family. 60 made members, over 150 associates, soldiers like Sax Lanza, who controlled the Fulton Fish Market, Phil Lombardo, who would one day become boss of the family, Fat Tony Salerno himself, who answered directly to Coppola. And then, just a few blocks west and north, there is another Harlem, Black Harlem, the Harlem of the Apollo Theater and the Savoy Ballroom, the Harlem of Langston Hughes and Adam Clayton Powell Jr., the Harlem where the numbers racket is not just a gambling operation, it is an economy, an entire underground financial system, employing hundreds of runners, collectors, bankers, and controllers, generating hundreds of thousands of dollars a day. And at the top of that economy, At the center of that world sits one man, Bumpy Johnson. By 1955, Bumpy has been running Harlem for over 2 decades. He fought Dutch Schultz in a war that left more than 40 people dead. He negotiated a peace with Lucky Luciano that gave Harlem's black numbers bankers their independence. He survived prison. He survived betrayal. He has a deal with the Italian families. They stay east of Lexington. He stays west. The profits get split. Everybody eats. But Trigger Mike does not want to share anymore. He wants the whole plate. Here is what the history books leave out. By the mid-1950s, Michael Coppola has essentially stepped back from daily operations on the streets of New York. He has relocated to Miami Beach. He lives in a house on Alton Road that he bought from a Cleveland mobster for $30,000. He operates a lone, sharking business from his living room. He collects monthly envelopes from Fat Tony Salerno, who manages the 116th Street crew in his absence. But Coppola is not retired. He is still capo. He still gives orders, and the orders he gives in the spring of 1955 change everything. The problem, as Coppola sees it, is this: the black numbers operators in Harlem are making too much money. The split that was negotiated in the 1930s, when Bumpy and Luciano carved up the territory, is outdated. Harlem's population has exploded since the Great Migration. The policy banks are handling more bets than ever, and Coppola believes his crew deserves a bigger cut. But he does not send a message first. He does not request a sit down. He does not go through the protocol that the commission established to prevent exactly this kind of conflict. Instead, he does what he has always done. He sends muscle. 3 of his soldiers receive the order. Their instructions are precise. Go into Black Harlem. Visit the biggest numbers banks. Make it clear that from now on, the 116th Street crew is taking a larger percentage. And if anyone refuses, if anyone even hesitates, make an example. This is what Trigger Mike Coppola understands about the world. Violence is a language, and he has been speaking it fluently since 1927, when he was first arrested for murder. But here is what Trigger Mike does not understand. Bumpy Johnson speaks the same language, and in Harlem, Bumpy speaks it louder. The 3 soldiers cross Lexington Avenue on a Tuesday morning. They are not wearing suits. They are wearing work clothes. They look like delivery men. They carry no visible weapons. Their first stop is a candy store on Lenox Avenue. This candy store sells penny candy and newspapers to children. It also takes in over $2,000 a day in numbers bets. The soldiers walk in. They speak to the man behind the counter. They tell him the arrangement has changed. They tell him that starting this week, 40% goes to the 116th Street crew, not the 20% they have been paying. 40. The man behind the counter says nothing. He nods. He waits for them to leave. Then he picks up the telephone. The second stop is a barber shop on 135th Street. The same message is delivered. The same demand. 40%. The barber, who runs one of Bumpy's mid-level collection points, listens. He nods. He waits. He picks up the phone. The third stop is a social club on 145th Street. By now, the soldiers are confident. Nobody has argued. Nobody has pushed back. They deliver the message a third time. They step back out into the sunlight. And they have no idea that every telephone call made in the last 2 hours has reached the same destination. A brownstone on Edgecombe Avenue, the home of a man who, at that very moment, is sitting in his living room reading poetry. A man who quotes Shakespeare and keeps a switchblade in his pocket. A man who once slashed a rival 36 times in a single fight and removed his eye. Bumpy Johnson does not panic. He does not shout. He does not immediately reach for a weapon. He sits. He thinks. He makes one phone call. By nightfall, every numbers runner, every collector, every lookout, every street soldier in Black Harlem knows what has happened, and they know what is coming next. Now listen, if you have ever seen Bumpy Johnson portrayed on television, in Godfather of Harlem, in Hoodlum, in any of the movies, you have seen a version of how he operates. But the real Bumpy Johnson does not hold meetings in restaurants. He does not announce his plans in public. He gathers his people the way a general gathers his officers, quietly, in private, in spaces that have no names. The meeting happens that night. The location is a basement apartment on St. Nicholas Avenue. The men who arrive do so one at a time. They enter through a side door. They say nothing to anyone on the street. These are not Hollywood gangsters. These are men who have fought alongside Bumpy since the war with Dutch Schultz. Men who were there when the bodies piled up in the 1930s. Men who know that when Bumpy calls a meeting at night, something serious is about to happen. Bumpy lays out the situation. Coppola's men came into our territory. They went to our spots. They changed the terms without asking. They did not request a sit down. They did not come through Luciano's people. They came as conquerors. Bumpy looks around the room. He does not raise his voice. He says, "This ends in 72 hours. Not with a war, not with bodies that bring police, not with headlines that attract federal attention. It ends with a message so clear, so permanent, that no one from east of Lexington ever crosses into our territory uninvited again. And right now, right at this moment in the story, I need you to pause and think about something. Because what makes Bumpy Johnson different from every other crime boss in American history is not his willingness to use violence. Every gangster uses violence. What makes Bumpy different is his precision, his restraint, his understanding that the most powerful message is not the one delivered with a gun. It is the one delivered with a consequence so specific, so tailored, so personal, that the recipient can never forget it. If you are learning something new about this man right now, do me a favor. Like this video. Share it with someone who thinks they know the real story of Harlem, because trust me, we are just getting started. Bumpy's crew does not go looking for Coppola's 3 soldiers that night. They do not need to, because here is the advantage that Bumpy Johnson has always held over every Italian mob crew that has ever tried to operate in Black Harlem. He has eyes on every block, every doorman, every shoeshine boy, every newspaper vendor, every building superintendent in a 30-block radius knows Bumpy Johnson. Many of them owe him something. Some of them owe him everything. He has paid rent for families who were about to be evicted. He has bought school clothes for children who had none. He has delivered Thanksgiving turkeys to buildings where people were going hungry. This is not charity in the traditional sense. It is investment. It is the construction of an intelligence network so deep, so organic, so woven into the fabric of everyday life that no outsider can move through Harlem without Bumpy knowing about it. By Wednesday morning, Bumpy has the names of all 3 soldiers. He knows where they entered Harlem. He knows what route they walked. He knows which candy store, which barbershop, which social club. He knows what they said, word for word, and he knows one more thing. He knows that these 3 men are not shooters. They are messengers. Low-level soldiers sent to deliver an ultimatum, and this means that Trigger Mike Coppola calculated wrong. He sent boys to do a man's job. He assumed that the mere weight of the Genovese name would be enough to make Harlem bend. He was wrong. What happens next unfolds over 3 days, and it unfolds with surgical precision. On the first night, one of Coppola's soldiers is approached while leaving a bar in East Harlem. He is not in Black Harlem. He is on his own turf. But the 2 men who approach him are not from Bumpy's crew. They are men the soldier recognizes. They are Italian. They are connected. And they deliver a message from someone who outranks Trigger, Mike Coppola. The message is this: you made a move without authorization. The commission did not approve this. The soldier goes home that night knowing that Bumpy Johnson has already spoken to someone above Coppola's head. On the second day, the numbers banks in Black Harlem resume normal operations, every one of them. The 20% arrangement continues unchanged. But something else happens. 3 of Coppola's own collection points in East Harlem, places where Italian numbers runners take bets from Italian bettors, suddenly experience problems. Runners do not show up for work. Collectors cannot find their slips. Cash envelopes arrive short, not by thousands, by pennies. Just enough to send a message. Just enough to say, we can reach your operation too. On the third day, Bumpy Johnson does something that no one expects. He sends a gift, a wooden box, delivered to a social club on 116th Street. Inside the box is a bottle of expensive Scotch whiskey and a handwritten note. The note contains 2 sentences. The content of those sentences has never been published. But within 24 hours of that box arriving, Trigger Mike Coppola makes a phone call from Miami Beach to East Harlem, and the phone call contains one instruction: leave Harlem alone. Now, stop. Because what just happened is not a simple gang conflict. It is not a turf war. It is something far more sophisticated, and it reveals the true genius of Bumpy Johnson. Most crime bosses, when their territory is threatened, do one of 2 things. They go to war, or they capitulate. Bumpy does neither. He uses a 3-pronged strategy that operates simultaneously on 3 different levels. The first level is intelligence. He identifies the threat, traces it to its source, and maps the operation within hours. No guesswork, no wasted movement. The second level is political. Instead of responding directly to Coppola, he goes above Coppola. He contacts people within the Genovese family structure who understand that unauthorized moves like this threaten the stability of the entire arrangement between the Italian families and the black rackets in Harlem. These are people who understand that a war in Harlem would bring police, federal investigators, and newspaper reporters into a neighborhood that the Mafia needs to remain quiet. Bumpy weaponizes the Mafia's own rules against the man who broke them. The third level is economic. By disrupting Coppola's own collection points, even slightly, even temporarily, Bumpy demonstrates that the relationship between East Harlem and Black Harlem is not one of dominance and submission. It is interdependence. If Coppola wants his runners to operate smoothly, he needs Bumpy's cooperation. If he does not have that cooperation, his own numbers suffer. This 3-pronged response, intelligence, political escalation, economic pressure, is resolved without a single shot being fired, without a single headline, without a single arrest, and it is resolved in exactly 72 hours. This is why Bumpy Johnson controlled Harlem for 30 years, not because he was the most violent man in the neighborhood, but because he was the most strategic. Let us be clear about who Trigger Mike Coppola was. Because this is not a story about a minor player overstepping his boundaries. This is a story about one of the most powerful and dangerous men in the history of the American Mafia being outmaneuvered by a black crime boss from South Carolina. Michael Coppola was born on July 2, 1900, in New York City. By the time he was 25, he had spent time in Sing Sing for grand larceny, felonious assault, and homicide. He claimed various occupations: barber, restaurant owner, employment clerk, but his real job was violence. He earned the name Trigger Mike because of his willingness to use a gun in situations where other mobsters would negotiate. He was present at the 1929 Atlantic City Conference, where the foundations of organized crime in America were established. He took control of the 116th Street crew after Ciro Terranova was shelved. He controlled Harlem's policy racket for the Italian side, bringing in over $1 million a year by the late 1930s. He controlled Mason Tenders unions, waterfront operations, floating crap games, vending machines, and loan sharking operations across 3 boroughs. Joseph Falacchi testified that Coppola's crew was the largest in the entire Genovese family. At its peak, the 116th Street crew contained approximately 60 made members and over 150 associates. This was the man who decided to take Harlem from Bumpy Johnson, and this was the man who failed. But the failure did not come from weakness. It came from a fundamental misunderstanding. Coppola operated on the assumption that power comes from fear, from the willingness to kill, from the size of your crew and the weight of your family name. Bumpy Johnson operated on a different assumption. Power comes from the community, from the people who live on your blocks, shop in your stores, worship in your churches, raise their children on your sidewalks. If those people are loyal to you, not because they fear you, but because you have earned their loyalty, then no army from east of Lexington Avenue can take what is yours. After the 72 hours, something remarkable happens. Nothing. No escalation, no retaliation from the Genovese family, no bodies floating in the East River, no federal investigations triggered by unusual violence. The numbers operation in Black Harlem continues exactly as it has for the past 20 years. The 20% arrangement remains unchanged. Coppola's soldiers never cross Lexington Avenue uninvited again. Within 2 years of this incident, Trigger, Mike Coppola, essentially retires from active street operations permanently. He turns over the 116th Street crew to Fat Tony Salerno and retreats to his house in Miami Beach, where he tends orchids and collects ivory and beats his second wife so badly that she will eventually flee to Europe with $250,000 of his money and commit suicide in a Roman hotel room after writing a letter calling him a yellow-bellied coward. Coppola dies in 1966 of kidney disease at a hospital in Boston. His funeral is so quiet that federal agents who have been watching him do not even learn about it until it is over. Bumpy Johnson continues to rule Harlem until his death on July 7, 1968, when he suffers a heart attack at Wells Restaurant on 125th Street. The waitress has just brought him coffee, a chicken leg, and hominy grits. 7,000 people attend his funeral. Criminals and politicians and ordinary people stand side by side. Because in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson is not a gangster. He is an institution. And here is the part of the story that matters most, the part that no documentary and no television show has ever gotten right. The reason Bumpy Johnson held Harlem for 30 years is not because he was dangerous. Every mobster is dangerous. The reason Bumpy Johnson held Harlem for 30 years is because the people of Harlem wanted him to hold it. He built something that triggered Mike Coppola, for all his money and all his soldiers and all his connections to the most powerful crime family in America, could never build. He built trust. And trust, in the end, is the only thing that cannot be taken at gunpoint. Now I need to tell you one final thing, because this story is not really about 1955. It is not really about numbers banks or territory lines or 3 soldiers crossing Lexington Avenue. This story is about a pattern that repeated itself for decades. Every time the Italian Mafia tried to take complete control of Harlem, from Dutch Schultz in the 1930s to Trigger Mike in the 1950s, to the Genovese family pressuring Bumpy after his release from Alcatraz in 1963, they failed. They failed because they made the same mistake every time. They assumed that Harlem operated like every other piece of territory, that you could take it with guns and money and the fear of a famous name. But Harlem is not a piece of territory. Harlem is a community, and communities cannot be conquered from the outside. They can only be led from within. Bumpy Johnson understood this. He understood it because he was not an outsider. He grew up in Harlem. He knew the barbers and the preachers and the school teachers and the grandmothers. He knew who needed rent money in December. He knew whose son needed a winter coat. He knew which blocks were safe and which corners were dangerous. He was not leading Harlem from a mansion on Long Island or a cabana at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach. He was leading from a brownstone on Edgecombe Avenue, from a booth at Wells Restaurant, from the sidewalks where children called him by name. That is why 3 Italian soldiers could walk into a candy store on Lenox Avenue and demand 40%, and within 72 hours be told by their own boss to stand down, because Bumpy Johnson did not need to fire a single shot to win. He had already won the moment the phone calls started. Every person in those businesses called Bumpy first. Not the police, not the district attorney, not another gangster. They called Bumpy. That is power, and it is a kind of power that no amount of violence can defeat. If this story changed the way you think about Bumpy Johnson, about Harlem, about the Mafia, share this video and subscribe, because this channel is dedicated to the untold true stories of America's most feared crime bosses, the stories that were buried, the stories that were hidden, the stories that the people who lived them wanted you to hear. And we are just getting started. One last thing. In 1963, when Bumpy Johnson walks out of Alcatraz after 11 years, he returns to a Harlem that has changed. Heroin has replaced the numbers as the dominant racket. Younger men are circling. The Genovese family, now run by Vito Genovese from prison, has expanded its reach. Fat Tony Salerno controls the Italian side from the Palma Boys Social Club, generating what some estimates place at $50 million a year. Everyone assumes Bumpy is finished. Everyone assumes the old man has lost his edge. But within 6 days of walking out of prison, Bumpy Johnson reclaims his position. He does not fire a shot. He does not stage a takeover. He simply walks through Harlem, block by block, store by store, handshake by handshake, and the people take him back. Because they remember the turkeys at Thanksgiving. They remember the rent payments in winter. They remember the man who in 1955 stopped 3 Italian soldiers from changing the terms of their survival without raising his voice. Trigger Mike Coppola is dead by then. His crew belongs to Salerno now. But the lesson of 1955 still echoes. Nobody crosses into Bumpy's Harlem. Nobody. Bumpy Johnson dies on July 7th, 1968 at 62 years old. His last meal is coffee and fried chicken. His funeral fills the streets, and to this day, if you walk up Edgecombe Avenue in Harlem, past the brownstone where he lived, past the corner where his people gathered, past the barber shop where one Tuesday morning a phone call changed everything, you can still feel something in the air. Not fear, not nostalgia, something deeper, something that the Genovese family could never buy, and Trigger Mike Coppola could never take. The memory of a man who held an entire neighborhood in his hands, not with a trigger, with trust.